Broken or just stuck? The path forward could start with looking back. Let's talk about it with Adam Young on Steve Brown, etc.
He's an old white guy, an author, broadcaster, and seminary professor who's sick of religion. And he's brought friends. Please welcome Steve Brown, etc.
And we are so glad that you're taking an hour out of your busy day to spend it with us. That's a high compliment, and we take it as such. In case you're wondering, I'm Steve, the aforementioned old white guy. Matthew Porter is our executive producer. Matthew, your back went out, didn't it?
It did, and it hurt, but you know what? I rested, and I'm back because we got work to do, so back at it. Wow.
Well,
Kind of leaves you speechless, doesn't it?
Matthew has the heart of a lion and the back of an 87-year-old woman. And our producer, Jeremy, is in the little glass booth. Jeremy's not a counselor, not allowed to talk to people lying on a couch. At least that's what the people in the furniture store said. Our one-man IT department, John Myers, is in the tech bunker. John helped us recently launch the Vault Project. You can check that out at keylife.org/vault. And I have no idea.
Don't
they
worry
never
about it.
tell me anything around here.
You wouldn't want to know.
And Dr. George Bingham is the president of Key Life. George says the pen is mightier than the sword, but the beard is mightier than both of them. I don't know. I just read it. And Kathy Wyatt is the soft, feminine side of this program. Kathy's an expert in the kitchen. So when she says these intro jokes are half-baked, you can believe it.
That was a good one, Matthew.
Thank you.
We got a great guest. Adam Young is a trauma therapist and a licensed clinical social worker with master degrees, make that plural, in social work and divinity. He currently serves as a fellow with the Allender Center, and he hosts the Place We Find Ourselves podcast. We'll give you some information on that as we go along. And his new book, which I hold in my nicotine-stained fingers, is Make Sense of Your Story, Why Engaging Your Past with Kindness Changes Everything. Adam, sure do appreciate having you with us. I was a pastor for a lot of years. In fact, I can make it to heaven without Jesus for having simply done that until I hit a wall. And when I hit the wall, I came very close to a breakdown. I'm not going to go into those details, but a lot of it has to do with my past story. I'm an adult child of an alcoholic. I'm a second-generation bastard, and I use that word in a technical sense. My father was the son of a single mother, and my grandfather committed suicide publicly in a town ballpark, and I hid all that stuff for a very long time. And when it came apart, I've decided I gotta do something. And I spent a year doing what you suggest, and if you had been around, but you weren't born yet, if I'd had you around and had this book in my hand, it would have been a half a year instead of a year. And out of that came a Born Free seminar that we did all over the country. We had consultants, psychologists, and theologians and biblical scholars meet in Atlanta to go over the material, because I have a tendency to say really stupid things. And we gleaned it, and a lot of people were helped in those early days with some of the things that you go and, all right, enough introduction about why I liked your book, and I really did. Tell us, I mean, if I'm a new creature, and if the one thing I do is forgetting the past and reaching on and walking with Jesus into the future, are you crazy? Why do you say don't do that? First, do something else.
Well, let's stick with the words that you're sharing. You're quoting Paul from Philippians, and right before Paul says, straining towards what is ahead, he talks about the fellowship of sharing in the sufferings of Christ so that I might attain the resurrection of the dead. And so Paul is linking knowing something about the sufferings of Christ with the resurrection. And another place where Paul does this is where he says that our calling is to rejoice with those who rejoice and mourn with those who mourn. This is all a way of saying to be Christian is to hold death and resurrection together. And sadly, many of us who have been raised, particularly in like evangelical strands of the faith, are very suspicious of looking at the past. And I understand it, but it gets us in trouble because we cannot process, we cannot grow through, we cannot move through what we refuse to look at and engage.
That's not easy, though, is it? I mean, the reason we don't is because, frankly, that's kind of scary. I mean, I don't want to go there. I've already lived it. I don't want to do it again. It's kind of like watching the movie, The Passion of the Christ. I've got people who have that movie in their library. Man, I watched it once. I ain't going back and watch it the second time. But it's really important, isn't it?
It's super important for two reasons. Number one, according to Jesus, it's the truth that will set us free. And our past has a truth to it. There are, like you said, your grandfather had a story, and that story abruptly ended when he took his life, and that has become part of your story. And that matters to God, and I think it should matter to you.
And I'm just one of the programs we did here was a number of years ago with a guy who had Alzheimer's, and it took a lot of editing, but it was one of the best programs we ever put on the air. I mean, he'd lose it, but he'd come back. But he said when the doctor said that he had Alzheimer's, it scared the spit out of him until Jesus said to him, "When you walk in the mist, I'll walk with you." That's true here, isn't it? I mean, it's scary to go back to those places, but I think Jesus says, if you're willing to go there, you won't go alone. I'll go with you.
Absolutely. I could not agree with you more. My experience has been that I have met Jesus more intimately, more deeply in the very places of what the Old Testament calls the valley of the shadow of death, the wilderness, the desert, what the psalmist calls the pit. In other words, those places of shame, fear, rage that I hold in my body that are rooted in my past experiences, especially as a boy. And remember, when we're boys and girls, our brains are not fully developed, and we are extremely impressionable. And the experiences that we have in our families of origin, they imprint on our brains in a very deep way. And God longs, I think, to meet us there.
You know, one of the things I discovered when I went through the aforementioned process was I didn't remember.
Yes.
I mean, it was all of a sudden and very incrementally, because Jesus likes me more than he likes most people. Very incrementally, those memories started coming back. They would come in a dream, and I don't dream. They would come at the strangest time when I was teaching or preaching a sermon. They would come when I was talking to a friend, and all of a sudden, the pieces of the puzzle began to fill in, and he was in charge of that whole process. Had he not been, I'm not sure I'd still be here.
Yes, and your task as you remembered something while you were preaching is, will I welcome this memory with a posture of hospitality, or will I push it away, minimize it, exclude it? And you welcomed those memories, and that brought you on a journey.
Well, there was some kicking and screaming and cussing and spitting. I just want you to know that. So it wasn't just this wonderful Christian welcoming Jesus, opening doors that I didn't want to go in. I mean, I'm not that spiritual, but I'm better than I was because of what Adam's talking about. This book is great. You can read Dan Allender's Truth Be Told, but you got to get this one because it details with kindness and mercy and grace something that isn't always pleasant for us, revisiting our past. Hey guys, this is hard work. So we have to rest up occasionally. But like Jesus, we're coming back. Hey, thanks for joining us. We're talking to Counselor, and he's trying to fix us and gave up in the first section. Talking to Counselor and author Adam Young and his new book, and you got to get it. This is a life changer. Make sense of your story, why engaging your past with kindness changes everything.
Adam, the book is fascinating, particularly to me because I write stories and, just always trying to find meaning and the power of context. And so this really vibes with that. You talk about story work. I guess that would be that process of what you're broadly talking about, like re-engaging your past and kind of welcoming any kind of. Can you tell us a little bit more about that process and help us understand? I know there's somebody listening going, well, all I need to do is just be really dedicated to my quiet times and my Bible studies, and help us understand how this does something that complements all of that.
Well, one of the first stories in the Bible, God says to Hagar when she's running into the wilderness, "Where have you come from?" And this book is really an invitation to answer that question with particularity. So when I speak about your story, I'm really talking about the incidents, the scenes that you remember from when you were 10, when you were 14, when you were 6 years old, and that really bad thing happened in first grade that nobody's ever talked about, and you told your parents about it, and they responded in a very dismissive and shaming way. We remember anecdotes, we might think of them as vignettes. They're always fragments, they're always partial, because the human brain doesn't have the capacity for a video replay memory. But these memories hold data. And I think it's precious data that can point you to the next question God said to Hagar: where are you going? So if you want to understand where you've come from and where you're going, you need to understand something about the pivotal stories of your growing up years that you still remember.
Adam, just checking. You've been there and done that. If you haven't, we're going to end the program here. Because you're a preacher who preaches against sin and is self-righteous. But you've been here, haven't you? This was not easy for you either.
No, it was excruciating. You used the word scary earlier. That's not a strong enough word. To look at some of these stories of heartache, abuse, trauma, shame, is a very terrifying and disruptive endeavor. And I've absolutely been there. And I can say this, it didn't kill me. And I grew a lot as a human being in freedom, in vitality, and even in joy by looking at places where I never thought those things would be found.
Adam, would you explain a little bit, talk to us a little bit about the connection between stories and the development of our brain? Yeah, I mean, I know that the past has a direct impact on where we are today and has an influence on as we head into the future. But how does that affect brain development?
Sure. You have billions and billions of neurons in your brain, and those neurons connect with one another in only one of two ways, either genetics, hair color, eye color, height, or your life experiences. So, with the exception of the genes that were passed on to you, Kathy, the connections in your brain, which filter all of your experiences in the present, are entirely a function of the experiences that you had as a girl. And what we know is that younger experiences, when our brain is first developing, have a disproportionate influence on the construction of the neural networks in your brain. Therefore, it's really important to know something about your earliest relationship with your primary caretakers if you want to understand the brain that's currently in your skull.
Good night.
Yeah,
Oh my.
Adam, and I think basically you make the case that this is an important type of work for pretty much everybody. But what are some of those kinds of signs that somebody who hasn't really thought that much about it or whatever might look for that would say, this is really important for me to dig into now?
I would say two categories. If you have trouble with emotions, and by that I mean you often experience what you probably think of as an overreaction. You get angry, you feel deep levels of shame, you feel anxiety, and it feels disproportionate to the circumstance. And who among us has not experienced what we think of as an overreaction? That's a symptom that is telling you there's something going on in your brain based in your past story that is getting activated or triggered. And you need to understand the linkage between your reaction in the present and your stories from the past that have been contributing to your reactivity. That's category number one. Category number two is difficulty with relationships. Relationships tell us, and especially rupture in relationships, the way we navigate relational conflict tells us the truth about how we were taught to experience the world. And they tell us something about our past story. So if you have difficulty with emotions or difficulty with relationships, then it would probably really be a good idea to spend some time looking at your past stories.
No. Well, I was just going to say, and as I'm noticing, a majority of us around this table are kind of way down the road on the age scale. Make the case for older people that it's worth the effort.
Your life is not over. I got an email today from a 79-year-old who said, Adam, I've been listening to your podcast. I realized some things about what's called they have an avoidant attachment style. That's just a way of talking about their inclination is to shut down, to self-regulate their affect. And they were saying, I've realized this about myself, and I'm realizing that it's playing out in my relationships, and I want to know more. 79, they want to know more.
But once you reach 80, you don't have
Yeah,
to do
well, I'm holding out for that.
You're just coasting.
it. That's in the Bible, by the way. Listen, we're going to find out when we get back. What if your memories are not verifiable? In other words, what if you made them up? What if you're looking at your past and it's fiction and you think that it's true? How do you separate and what do you do with that? The book we're talking about is Make Sense of Your Story, Why Engaging Your Past with Kindness Changes Everything. And we're talking to Adam Hope, who's been there and who's done that. Hey, we're going to come back. You do too. Hey, we're hanging out with counselor and author Adam Young, and you can keep up with him at adamyoungcounselor.com or on Instagram at Adam Young Counseling. Before the break, I brought up a question which is really interesting because, in fact, our memories are hardly ever verifiable. And sometimes when we try to verify them, we find out it was a lot different than we remembered. Every time I go back to my hometown, I look at buildings and I thought they were a lot larger than I remember them being. And I'm being facetious. But when you do this, how do you know what's real and what isn't?
The body remembers. And that is a very important sentence to hold when you're looking at your past story. And especially for Christians in the West, we have dismissed the body as secondary to the soul. And for many of us, we don't really have a good theology of the body. We don't understand that our bodies, and by bodies, I mean your gut, your chest, your throat, your neck, will give us data about our stories. And our bodies are constantly speaking to us through a sensation of butterflies, through a lump in the throat. So to attune to your body is to listen to the past. And so what I would invite listeners to consider is, when does your body get activated in the present? And then to ask yourself, when have I felt this before? Especially as a boy or a girl. When have I felt this feeling before? Because remember, neurons connect in a very specific way, and what fires together wires together neuronally. And therefore, we all have familiar sensations in the present that we've had before, 2 years ago, 30 years ago. And so what I want to invite the listener to do is to pay attention to their body and let their body be a participant in the detective work of exploring their family of origin story.
So when I wince, I need to ask why. Well, go ahead. Answer that, and then I got another question.
Yes, when you wince, will you bring some curiosity and some kindness, both curiosity and kindness, to the reaction you just had? And ask yourself, how might this be related to my past stories?
Good stuff.
Well, and if
Go
I
ahead.
could just kind of follow up on Steve's initial question. So if, for example, your story is what you remember, let me put it this way, is if what you remember is not accurate per se, does that matter? I mean, are you still kind of translating, the story that you remember and how it affects you?
None of us have the ability for a video replay memory. So the brain just doesn't have that capacity. The question is, will you welcome, like a guest at your dinner table, the memory that you do have? And will you avoid dismissing it? There is a passage in Jeremiah 6, it's repeated in Jeremiah 8, where God gets very angry at the leadership of Israel. And why? Because they dress the wounds of my people as though they were not serious. Peace, peace, they say, when there is no peace. Now, sadly, that's what many of us do with our own memories, and particularly our own wounds. We remember something and we dress it as though it's not serious. In other words, we dismiss it, we discount it. We say that happened 30 years ago. I can't believe it's affecting me still today. Or I should be over it. My invitation is to welcome it as a guest brought by the Holy Spirit for you to address something that's really important in your heart.
It also reminds me of, sickness and pain just on a physiological level. Like, we don't want pain. Pain can save your life. Pain tells you something is wrong. You're like, yeah, I'm going to just numb it. That's a great way to die quick, is if you just shut off every means of pain. If it's telling you, alerting you to some underlying problem, that's exactly what this is it not? When you feel a disturbance, you feel uncomfortable, to go, where is this coming from? And certainly this might mean something if it's a recurring kind of thing.
Absolutely. I think pain is a gift from God to point us in the direction of where we need to go next to experience deeper levels of healing and restoration, which is what the Spirit of God is about in the world.
Maybe we'll address it on the other side of the break, but it's been said so often that it's a cliche that demons lose their power in the light. I hope you're going to say they do, because I'm not going there if I'm going to get killed. But when the light shines, when the sun shines, when it's all out in the open and you don't have to pretend anymore, there may be a freedom that you never experienced before. So be afraid, but not too afraid. Welcoming, but not too welcome. Honest as much as you can. And then there's a God who'll make up for the lack. Hey, we're out of here. Got to rest up, because this is hard work, but we're going to return. Hope you do too. Thanks for spending time with us here. By the way, have you subscribed to our free weekly Key Life email? It will encourage you with the best content from keylife.org and take 15 strokes off your golf game.
Wow.
My goodness. Are you going to...
Results may vary.
At miniature golf.
Go to keylife.org and /subscribe. Okay, before the break, I said demons die in the light. Do they?
Shame dies in the light of other people witnessing your story. That's how I'd put it. So it is impossible to heal with a cup of coffee, your Bible, a journal, and a great view out the window. Why? Because we need other people. The Bible calls this the body of Christ. I need you, Steve, to witness my story as a 10-year-old boy for the shame that boy felt to dissipate. In other words, when that shame is brought into the light by me telling you the story, and I see your face, and I hear your tone of voice, and I hear your reaction, whether it's anger or sorrow, whatever you're feeling, that is the process where neurons in the brain begin to rewire and healing happens in the heart.
Adam, uh, and I agree with you. I really do. This is not a disagreement, except we have people in the body of Christ that are as mean as snakes. And as soon as I give them a little bit of my soul, they're going to stomp it in the ground.
That's right.
So that gets kind of scary. So you got to be careful the person with
Absolutely.
whom you share it.
Absolutely. And your language is actually the language of Christ. If you give a pearl, and a pearl is a piece of your story, especially as a boy or a girl, if you give a pearl to someone who is not worthy of holding that story well, what Jesus says is they will turn and trample you to pieces. And we've all experienced, many of us have experienced that.
Oh,
So
yeah.
you need to be judicious in who you give editorial privilege over your life. You need to be very cautious. And how do you do that? You give a piece of your story and you see what they do with it. And that informs you about whether this person is deserving of any more of your heart.
There's a sense in which when somebody tells you their story, that's a high compliment. It really is a lot more than most of us think. There's some people, and Adam, you're one of them. I said that off the air. I kind of trust you. In fact, in the last 2 minutes, I'm going to confess my 10 biggest sins. And
Between us.
just between us.
And as we're talking, I can really start to see in a new way how it would benefit somebody who realizes they need to do something different. They need to engage their own story. How partnering with a counselor would really, you're like, oh, I think I start to get it, because they're going to ask the next question and they're going to say maybe a hard truth in a loving way, kind of draw all of this stuff out. In a practical way, for somebody who has never engaged that before, what does that look like? To ask how long it takes probably is the same question as like how deep is a hole. But can you give us any insights as to what it actually looks like to start engaging that process?
Yes. Especially if you know that you have a history of trauma or you have a lot of symptoms, it can be, if you have the financial resources, it can be incredibly helpful to risk finding a trauma-informed therapist and begin sharing some of your stories with that person. And like Steve said, to share your story is to honor the other person, and not everyone's worthy of that. And so I am far less interested in somebody's credentials, their education, as I am in have they engaged their own story, and do they hold yours with a sense of honor and kindness? And kindness is not niceness. It is not a listening ear. It is the willingness to name the boy or girl in the stories accurately and well.
And by naming them well, I mean, you put a lot of emphasis on that particular qualifier. Talk
Yes.
a little more about that.
Well, most of us don't know our own stories because we're too close to them. And so I did not know my own story until I shared one of my stories with other people, and they began to say, Adam, you were in a triangulated, emotionally enmeshed relationship with your mother. And I'm like, no, I wasn't. And they said, well, this is what you've just told us about the nature of your relationship with your mother. When you came home from school, you said you would go find her and tend to her sorrow, tend to her upset. And this was a pattern. And it went on for years and years and years. And you told us that your father was emotionally checked out of their marriage. And so you filled that role. And I'm like, yeah, they are beginning to name that boy in a way that I couldn't. Why? Because it was just normal for me. It's just the way it was. It didn't seem odd to me, and that's the case for all of us. Whatever you experienced was normal for you, even if it was trauma.
Life is darker than we think, isn't it?
Yes, and the truth is largely lacking in our world.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, you almost wonder. I mean, before the past several decades, how did people survive at all? I mean, you've got billions of people that don't have the opportunity or the inclination to kind of tell their stories.
Well, they were trying to stay alive by killing the buffalo
Yeah.
and planting the carrots. You don't have time for a counselor when you got a buffalo chasing you across the field. Maybe our time is not a good time. I don't know. Adam, speaking of time, we're out of time, and I hate it. I need more than an hour with a therapist, frankly.
We've all thought that.
Adam, thank you so much for being with us. This has been a great hour, and we hope we can do this again. You keep writing, we'll keep talking. And if you need somebody, to tell your story to, we can always do that on the air with millions of listeners. The book is Making Sense of Your Story. Why Engaging Your Past with Kindness Changes Everything. Get this book. It is a game changer. And it's gentle. And it's not what you think. Adam, God bless you, brother. You go.
Thank you. Thank you all for having me.
Thanks.
Thank you.
What a great hour with Adam Young. We have a tendency to separate people, and some of you are saying, they're really screwed up. I'm glad I had healthy parents and I didn't have this trauma, and I didn't have, listen, you don't get out of this. It's a part of living. Gary Rupp, who's my dear friend, who was the person who put together the counseling program at the seminary where I taught. But in his office, he had a cartoon on, and it was framed. And it showed this gigantic auditorium. And when you look at it, there's hardly anybody there. There's one person way in the back and two off to the right and one on the front row in this big auditorium. And the caption underneath it said, "The Annual Convention of Children of Normal Parents." This is, we really do live in a fallen world. And most of the time we minimize that. We say, well, there's some people that are not nice. No, it's a lot worse than you think. And it's a lot worse than you think as it applies to you and as it applies to everybody else. And you can become cynical. I call myself a cynical old preacher, and I'm really not. I'm just a realistic old preacher, and I'm more cynical about me than anybody else. And there's a degree of freedom in that. That's why this kind of book is so helpful, because as you stick your toe into the deep end of the swimming pool and you got to jump, you got to have somebody who gives you some guidance on how to move your arms and kick your feet and swim. And this book, and a lot of Christians who have come to this reality, are able to help. Good hour. It was fun. As soon as we finish, we're going to tell each other our stories.
No, we're not.
Confess our sins.
I'm gonna have to charge you though.
Who's going to be here next week?
Next week, well, we thought we were going to have this person a couple of weeks ago, and then we had some scheduling issues. But next week is Isaac Villegas, and his book is Migrant God, A Christian Vision for Immigrant Justice. I think this is going to be a very interesting discussion because probably most everybody here probably views that and, probably similarly. And I have a sneaking suspicion that Isaac will come with some interesting views, and so it'll give us an opportunity to hear why other people think one way and other people think another way.
I do want you to know, if you're going to join us next week, that I don't agree with one thing, not one thing in his book. It'll be an interesting program.
I think he loves Jesus.
I doubt it.
Good grief.
You join us, and between now and then, don't do anything we wouldn't give you a wide berth.